So as you can see, what I've got in front of me are the collected ingredients to start with. For the person who is collecting ingredients, a couple of really important things to note is you can collect your spices together in the same cup. You don't need to collect them separate, so that's really great. Also making sure you're collecting your salt and pepper in something separate and not taking the salt and pepper into your kitchen. That's particularly important for sharing. I've also got the oil in a cup ready to go so that we're not taking oil back into our kitchens as well. Your recipe calls for half a tin of tomatoes, so I had a whole tin. I've tipped out half of it into a cup. As you can see, it's a little bit less than a whole cup, so just gauge with your eyes about what looks like half. So you should be able to share a whole tin with another group. And once you're finished with the tin tomatoes, giving the tin a rinse and putting it in the yellow bin. I've got my half a capsicum, so we've cut it in half this way, lengthways, not the other way. And same with the onion, we've cut it a particular way. So just making sure with your onion, if you're cutting a whole onion, you're not cutting it around the round edge and leaving the two funny ends like that. You're actually supposed to cut along the ends. That will give you the perfect sort of shaped onion that you would like. Off we have the high risk ingredients in a separate bowl. So I've got my little bit of chorizo and the 2 eggs. This will eventually become my high risk bowl and scrap bowl, so I'm sort of minimizing dishes there as well. If you don't want chorizo, you don't have to have it, but if you are having chorizo, it's only a really small amount as well. So what we'll do is we'll just have a quick look at the recipe and see how things need to be prepared. So the only really ingredients that need to be prepared in a particular way is the onion, and it needs to be finely diced. The garlic should be pre-crushed already, so you don't need to worry about preparing that. We have parsley. I don't have any parsley at home today, but you should have some parsley there, and just chopping that up with the knife. Have as much or as little as you would like. The red capsicum needs to be finely diced or finely chopped, very similar to the onion, and the chorizo will need to be cut into small pieces as well. So I'm going to start with the onion. And I've got my scrap bowl nearby. So with our onion, we want to put it flat side down so that it's not going anywhere and it's perfectly safe. We're going to grab our big chef knife and we're just going to cut off the ends because we don't really need these parts. They don't really have a good texture or flavour, and we want to get rid of the skin that's on the outside of the onion. So taking off one layer and just putting it away. Then we are going to start cutting our onion. You could do this 2 different ways. You could cut strips along this way, or you could start that way. I would recommend doing it this way first and having longer strips. It makes it a lot easier to cut later when we have to dice them, and they stay together a lot better. So just pushing our knife down firmly and drawing the knife forward and back. Doesn't matter if they fall away too much, just want to keep them close to each other. Making sure they're as similar as possible. They're the same thickness as best as you could possibly do. Lining them up, and we are just going to turn it around. Looks like the onion before, and then same thing, pushing the knife in, but holding it really firmly on the 2 ends to make sure that it's not going anywhere. And just dicing the onion, trying to make sure again that they're all the same size. Gets a bit tricky towards the end, so just as best as you can, cutting the rest of the onion, getting any large bits and giving them a bit of a cut as well. And then I'm going to put them in a separate bowl, get them out of the way. You could put them in another measuring cup, or you could put them in a separate section on the cutting board. I'm just getting them out of the way because I don't want them to come into contact with my capsicum. So for our capsicum, we just need to cut out the top very carefully and popping that in the scrap bowl. And we have this white stuff that isn't going to taste very nice. It's quite bitter, so we're just with our smaller paring knife try to cut as much of that out and popping that in the scrap bowl as well. So when we're cutting things with a skin like this, where it's really slippery and shiny, so things like tomatoes, eggplants, maybe even sometimes zucchinis, it's important to remember that the skin is actually really slippery, and with your blunt knives, making sure that you are putting it skin side down, because otherwise your knife might slip on the slippery skin and you might have an injury. So putting it skin side down, and we're just going to create strips. Again, like the onion, try to make them as similar size as possible. And really make sure that that skin's cut and they're all actually quite separate. If they're still stuck towards each other, you just need to rip them apart because it's going to make the next part a bit easier. Bunch them all up. And again, holding the two sides nice and firm and on the top as well. Grabbing your knife and just chopping them into smaller pieces. Trying to make them as similar as possible. Beautiful, and done. Same again, separate bowl, and it goes off to the side. The last ingredient that we need to prepare is our chorizo. Again, this has a really thick skin, so with the blunt knives it could be really tricky. If you have a serrated knife that's got some pointy edges, it could be good to use that for your chorizo. I've got good knives at home, so I'm just going to use my good knife. So getting it on a flat surface like we always do, and creating some strips that are relatively the same size. I'm gonna layer them 2 and 2, and then I'm gonna create some more strips, bunch them up like we've done with the capsicum, and then finally dice. Now notice that I've actually cut my chorizo right at the very end after my onion and capsicum, because it is the high risk ingredient, and if we were to cut it first, we would be putting ourselves at risk of cross-contamination. So really important thing to remember there. And that is all the ingredients that we need to prepare. So we are going to head over to the stovetop and we're going to start putting it all together. Okay, now we are ready to cook, and just like we talked about last week, I don't want anybody to start actually cooking until you've done all of your preparation. You shouldn't be heating up the pan and putting in the onion and garlic while your capsicum and chorizo still haven't been cut up. So making sure that you are having everything ready and organized before you actually put food to pan. Those of you who are working on electric stoves, make sure your pan has preheated. I've got my temperature on about medium low, because we don't want to burn our onion and garlic. So I've let it preheat for a little bit, but it's not smoking. If your pan is smoking, it's too hot. So my pan is probably ready for some oil, so I'm just going to carefully pop in my oil, get my dish out the way. I'm going to make sure that the pan is well covered, and we don't want the oil to heat up too much before we put in the rest of our stuff. So if it is smoking at this point with the oil in there, it's definitely too hot and you might need to start again. So I'm just going to go in with my onion and garlic now into the pan. And we're just sauteing these to get them to be nice and translucent and soft. We're not looking for any clear, no brown colour, or especially no black colour, because you've definitely burnt the onion. So it's really important that you are thinking about the temperature of your stovetop and thinking about, is this cooking too quickly? Can I see some colour? Do I need to take it off the heat? Do I need to reduce the heat? Do I need to even start again? So just moving it very gently around the pan. Just looking at this really nice and close, we can see that the onion doesn't have any solid white colour left to it anymore, and it's quite soft and glossy. If you just push your spoon down on it in the pan, it should have a bit of a soft texture as well, but shouldn't be mushy. So that means we are ready for our next ingredient. So we're going to go in with our capsicum. And we can also put our spices in at the same time. And we do need to cook the spices a little bit. So don't forget to add the spices with the capsicum and cook it out. If you don't do that, it just means that the spices won't fully, the flavour won't fully come out, and they might be a little bit bitter or have a grainy texture as well. And the spices just absorb up all of that oil that we had at the beginning, and it just makes it taste a lot better. So the capsicum won't need to be cooked for as long as the onion, making sure the temperature again is not too high. We don't want any burning or caramelization of the onion, and we just want the capsicum to go a little bit soft. It won't go clear like the onion did, it will just go a little bit soft. I'm also going to throw my chorizo in now because I want my chorizo to go a little bit crispy, so I'm going to put that in now. If you're not using chorizo, then you won't need to worry about this step. And we're just letting it all cook out together. And so cook it for about 5 minutes. You can either set a timer, look at the clock, or you could count to 5 minutes in your head if you wanted to. And just making sure you're giving it a good stir, making sure nothing's on the pan too long, getting any unwanted colour. Okay, so after the 5 minutes, it's not going to look that different to what it did when you started the 5 minutes. So you're not looking for any colour change or texture change, as per se. You are just making sure that you are having it on the stove for that 5 minutes. It's really important that you do that. I also forgot to mention about the cayenne pepper. The cayenne pepper is quite spicy, so if you do not like spice, either put a small amount in or don't put in any at all. So if you put too much in, it'll be very spicy, and mine's got quite a bit in it, so it's already burning my nose a little bit, so just be careful about the cayenne pepper. So now I'm going to go in with my tin tomatoes, very, very carefully pop them in the pan. A real sizzle. We need to go in with our water. This has got my salt and pepper in it as well, so you'll be putting your salt and pepper in now. Moving your dishes out of the way, like we always do. Giving it a little bit of a gentle stir. You want to mix the tomatoes in with the water. It'll stop sizzling so aggressively once you give it a bit of a mix. And we are going to go in with our bay leaf. So do not crush this bay leaf. Make sure it stays whole. This is going to give a really nice depth of flavour to our sauce. So it just can sit in the middle there when you're stirring through the sauce, just being really mindful not to damage or break the bay leaf. It needs to come out later. We're not going to be putting it in our dish when we eat it, so make sure it doesn't break up because it won't soften and it will stay really hard and it will be really unpleasant to eat. So just keeping that in mind when you're stirring through your sauce. So we now need to let this simmer. So we aren't going to put a lid on it or anything like that. We're just going to leave it in the pan. We're going to make sure that the temperature is not too high, and we don't want it to boil. So we're not looking for big bubbles. We're looking for really little bubbles all the way through, and every minute or so giving it a bit of a stir. So we have some smaller bubbles sort of starting in the water. If they get too big, you will need to turn the temperature down. If you are on an electric stove, making sure that you actually need to take the pan off the heat because it will take a while to cool down. So I'm going to let this simmer for about 10 minutes, stirring occasionally as I go, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what it should look like after about 10 minutes. Okay, so our water and liquid has simmered out of the sauce, and we've just got this really nice, I guess it's similar to a chutney now. So there's two things that you can do. The recipe that you have says to then take this mixture and put it into a ramekin. I don't have any ramekins at home, so I'm going to show you a different method, but it's pretty simple with the ramekin, just making sure you're splitting the mixture over 2 ramekins, 1 ramekin per student. But essentially once you put it into the mixture, what you will do is you'll make a well. So all that is getting a spoon and creating a little bit of space in the ramekin. So I'm creating the space in the pan. So each ramekin is just 1 well, but because I've got all my sauce in 1 pan, I'm going to do 2. Alright, and then you are just, make sure they're nice and big as well, because we are going to crack our eggs. So cracking them on the bench very gently, not on any jagged edges. We're just very gently cracking it on the bench, getting our thumbs into where we've cracked and cracking it into the ramekin, or I'm cracking it straight into my pan. I've reduced the temperature of my stovetop as well. It's quite low now because I don't want to burn anything. So I've cracked my 2 eggs. You would then take your bay leaf needs to come out. You would then put this straight into the oven with your ramekins and wait for the eggs to cook. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a lid over it, and that sort of creates a bit of an oven in the pan. So all the heat that's coming from the bottom is coming up, hitting the lid, turning back down and cooking from the top. So we've got a little bit of a makeshift oven happening here, but making sure that at school you have preheated your oven as well and it's ready to go. It's really important as well when you are putting your ramekins in the oven that you are putting them on a tray. If you put them straight into the oven, you might have some trouble taking them out. So put them on an oven tray to make sure that it's really easy to put in and out. So you'll have different dinner rolls than what I do. You have 2 little ones, but making sure that they're going on the tray as well. So you'll have your ramekins on your oven tray, nice and safe. Getting a little bit of baking paper and popping it on the tray. If it hangs over the edges, just fold it over and make it fit nice and neatly. All right, and you'll put your dinner roll on the oven tray with the ramekins, and they should all cook together at the same time. And it should take around 10 minutes, but we really just want to make sure the egg whites are cooked, and I'll show you what to look out for those egg whites when they're done. All right, let's take a look and see how they've gone. So mine have been in for a bit too long and the yolk's completely cooked, but I like my eggs that way, so that's actually not that big of a deal. But you don't want your eggs to be this pale. As long as your egg whites, when you poke them with a spoon, they feel quite firm, that's when you know your eggs are ready. So once they're done, you take them out of the oven and enjoy them with a bread roll, and that's it. Good luck, guys. I can't wait to hear all about it on Thursday at school.